What happens when the woman they thought was nothing turns out to be everything they forgot. For 40 years, Elizabeth had been invisible. She moved through the marble halls of the Arthur estate like a ghost, silent footsteps on cold stone, hands that scrubbed stains from crystal, eyes that never met the gaze of the immortals who ruled there. They didn't speak to her. They spoke around her, through her, as if she were air, as if she had no name, no history, no heartbeat worth noticing. But invisibility, Elizabeth had learned, was the safest place to hide. Then came the invitation. It arrived on a night when the moon bled red through the estate's glass windows. Queen Stella, draped in diamonds and cruelty, tossed the gold-embossed card at Elizabeth's feet while she knelt scrubbing the throne room floor. The queen's laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling like shattered glass. "You're invited to the royal wedding. Come, let the court see what failure looks like." It wasn't kindness. It was a public execution dressed as generosity. Stella wanted a peasant among her lords, a shadow to make her light shine brighter. She wanted Elizabeth broken, humiliated, and reminded, in front of 1,000 immortal witnesses, that some people are born to serve and some to be served. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section what time it is and where you are watching from. And remember to like and subscribe because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you, and I don't want you to miss it. Now, let's continue. What Stella didn't know was that Elizabeth had been born for neither. Somewhere in the forgotten corners of the estate, buried beneath decades of dust and silence, lay a name the vampire world once whispered with reverence. A bloodline so old, even the king had knelt before it. And on the night of that wedding, when Elizabeth stepped into the ballroom wearing emerald and gold, the colors of the ancient scholars who once ruled in shadows, every eye would turn. Not because she was a maid, but because she was the one they should have feared all along. This is the story of a woman who was invited to be mocked and left as a legend. The east wing smelled of lemon oil and old blood. Elizabeth had scrubbed these floors so many times she knew every crack in the marble by heart. The third tile from the library entrance chipped at the corner. The ninth step on the grand staircase groaned if you stepped too far left. The curtains in the drawing room hadn't been replaced in 17 years. She knew because she'd been the one to hang them. 40 years of knowing. 40 years of not mattering. She wrung out the cloth into the brass bucket, watching the dirty water swirl. Her knees ached. They always did now, especially on cold mornings when the estate felt more like a tomb than a home. But she never complained. Complaints required a voice, and voices required someone willing to listen. The vampires didn't listen. Lord Ashford passed her in the corridor that afternoon, his shoes clicking against stone. She pressed herself against the wall, bucket in hand, eyes down. He walked so close his coat brushed her shoulder. He didn't pause, didn't glance, didn't acknowledge that a living, breathing woman stood 3 inches from his arm. To him, she was wallpaper. In the kitchens, the younger staff whispered about the wedding, about the gowns already arriving from Paris, about the diamond chandelier being installed in the ballroom. Elizabeth listened while peeling potatoes, her hands moving on muscle memory alone. "They say the queen ordered 10,000 white roses," one maid giggled. "And a cake tall as a man," another added. Elizabeth said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than opinion. That evening, she carried firewood to the king's study. Frederick Arthur sat behind his desk, pale fingers tracing the rim of a crystal glass filled with something dark and thick. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge the careful way she stacked the logs, didn't notice when she curtsied, a habit from another life, before slipping back into the shadows. 40 years, and he had never once said her name. She wondered sometimes if they even knew she had won. By midnight, the estate had gone quiet. Elizabeth returned to her small room tucked behind the kitchens, barely large enough for a bed and a single candle. She sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at her hands. Scarred from years of lye soap, worn from decades of work that no one would remember. She had made herself small to survive. But smallness, she was beginning to realize, felt too much like disappearing. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the exhaustion and the ache, something old and forgotten stirred. Something that remembered what it felt like to stand tall. The summons came 3 days later. Elizabeth was polishing silver in the pantry when a sharp-nailed hand grabbed her wrist. One of Stella's attendants, a vampire with ice-blonde hair and a smile like a blade, yanked her upright without a word. "The Queen wants you. Now." No explanation. No time to even set down the cloth. Elizabeth was dragged through corridors she rarely entered, past tapestries worth more than her entire lifetime of wages, until they reached the Queen's private drawing room. The door swung open, and there sat Stella, reclined on a velvet chaise like a predator at rest. She was beautiful in the way sharp things are beautiful. Dangerous. Deliberate. There she is. Stella's voice dripped honey, laced with venom. My favorite little ghost. Elizabeth kept her eyes lowered. Her pulse drummed in her ears. You received my invitation, didn't you? Stella rose, circling Elizabeth like a hawk studying prey. To the wedding. Yes, Your Majesty. And you'll be attending, of course. It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in silk. Elizabeth hesitated. She had planned to throw the invitation away, to pretend it never existed, to remain exactly where she'd always been, unseen, untouched, safe in her invisibility. I wouldn't want to intrude. Intrude? Stella laughed, the sound bright and cruel. Oh, darling, you won't be intruding. You'll be performing. Elizabeth's stomach turned. Stella leaned in close, her breath cold against Elizabeth's ear. Do you know what this wedding is? It's a display of power, of wealth, of everything that separates the extraordinary from the... She pulled back, eyeing Elizabeth's worn dress and calloused hands. Ordinary. The word landed like a slap. I want the court to see the full spectrum, Stella continued, returning to her chaise. The glittering elite at the top, and you, sweet, humble, forgettable you, at the very bottom. A reminder of what happens to those without ambition, without beauty, without worth. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. Her nails bit into her palms. You'll sit in the back, naturally. Perhaps near the kitchen staff entrance. We'll provide you a dress, something appropriate. Simple. Drab. We wouldn't want you confused for an actual guest. Stella waved a dismissive hand. Think of it as charity. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to witness greatness. The attendants snickered. And if I refuse? The words escaped before Elizabeth could stop them. The room went silent. Stella's eyes narrowed, glinting like polished obsidian. She rose slowly, crossing the space between them until they stood inches apart. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper sharp enough to draw blood. Then you'll find yourself without a position, without a roof, without the mercy I've shown you all these years. She tilted her head. Do you really want to test me? Elizabeth's breath caught. She had nothing. No savings. No family. Nowhere to go. Stella knew it. So, the Queen's smile returned, victorious. You'll attend. You'll smile. You'll sit quietly in your little corner and be exactly what I need you to be. A prop. A punchline. A living reminder of powerlessness. Yes, Your Majesty, Elizabeth whispered. Good girl. Stella turned away, already bored. And Elizabeth, dismissed, humiliated, trembling, walked back through those golden halls with something new burning in her chest. Not anger. Something older than that. Something that tasted like dignity. Elizabeth didn't return to her room that night. Instead, her feet carried her down, past the servants' quarters, past the wine cellars, down stone steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps that weren't hers, into the part of the estate even the vampires had forgotten. The lower archives. The air here tasted different, thick with dust and old parchment, untouched by the polished cruelty of the world above. Shelves stretched into darkness, packed with books no one read anymore, records no one cared to keep. Elizabeth lit a candle. The flame caught, throwing shadows against leather spines and cracked wood. She'd discovered this place years ago, during her early days at the estate. It had become her refuge. The one corner of the Arthur house where she could breathe without being watched. "You're troubled." Elizabeth spun around. An old man sat in the corner, half hidden behind a tower of manuscripts. His face was lined with age, his hair white as winter, but his eyes, sharp, knowing, held the clarity of someone who had seen far more than time should allow. Thomas, the archivist. He'd been here longer than anyone could remember, cataloging records that would never be opened. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Elizabeth said softly. "You never do." He set down his quill, studying her with quiet intensity. "But tonight, you're running from something." She hesitated, then sank onto a wooden stool across from him. The invitation weighed heavy in her pocket. "They want me at the wedding," she whispered. "Not as a guest. As a joke." Thomas didn't look surprised. He never did. "And you plan to go?" "I have no choice." "Everyone has a choice, child." He rose slowly, joints creaking, and moved toward a locked cabinet Elizabeth had never seen opened. He produced a small iron key from his vest. "There's something you should see." The cabinet doors swung wide, revealing a single leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with a symbol Elizabeth had seen before, in dreams, in fragments of memory she couldn't quite place. A crescent moon encircled by stars. Thomas placed it in her hands. "Your mother left this here, the night she brought you to the estate." Elizabeth's breath stopped. "She made me promise not to speak of it until you were ready." His voice softened. "I think that time has come." She opened the journal with trembling fingers. The first page bore a name written in elegant script. House of Lavelle, keepers of the celestial archives. First scholars of the blood covenant. Her family name. "Your ancestors didn't serve kings, Elizabeth," Thomas said quietly. "Kings came to them for wisdom, for knowledge, for the very laws that govern this world." He tapped the crescent symbol. The Lavelles were the ones who taught vampires how to rule without destroying themselves. Elizabeth stared at the pages. Records of treaties, bloodline contracts, ancient rites her family had authored. Why did they hide me? Because knowledge is power, and power makes you a target. Thomas's eyes held hers. "Your parents chose survival over legacy. But legacy, it seems, has a way of finding you anyway." She closed the journal, her hands still shaking. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Thomas smiled, sad and knowing. "Remember who you are, before you let them tell you who you're not." Elizabeth didn't sleep that night. She sat by the single candle in her room, the journal open on her lap, and let the memories come. She had been 7 years old when everything changed. The house then had been different, grander, filled with light and the smell of old books. Her father's study overflowed with manuscripts in languages she couldn't yet read. Her mother moved through halls lined with celestial maps, her fingers always stained with ink. They had been happy, safe. Or so she thought. She remembered the night the visitors came. Elizabeth had been tucked in bed, but voices from downstairs pulled her awake. Angry voices. Her father's, usually so calm, raised in warning. The covenant is breaking, Lavelle. Choose a side before the choice is made for you. She'd crept to the top of the stairs, peering through the banister. 3 vampires stood in the entrance hall, their faces pale and sharp in the lamplight. Her father faced them, shoulders rigid. The Lavelles do not take sides, he said firmly. We preserve knowledge. We do not wield it as a weapon. Then you're fools. The tallest vampire stepped forward, his eyes gleaming red. The old houses are fracturing. War is coming, and those who don't fight will be consumed by those who do. Her mother appeared then, placing a hand on her father's arm. Elizabeth had never seen her look afraid before. But that night, her mother's fingers trembled. We've given you our answer, her mother said quietly. Please leave our home. The vampire's smile was all teeth. Your neutrality won't protect you. It never does. They left, but the threat lingered like smoke. That same week, her parents began to pack. Elizabeth watched from her bedroom doorway as her mother wrapped the crescent moon signet in cloth, her father burning letters in the fireplace. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing at her with eyes full of something she'd later recognize as grief. Where are we going? Elizabeth had asked. Her mother knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. Somewhere safe, my darling. But this is safe. Her father joined them, crouching so they were eye level. Not anymore. He'd explained it simply, the way you explain hard truths to children. The vampire world was tearing itself apart. Factions fighting for control. Blood feuds centuries old reignited. And the Lavelles, keepers of treaties, scholars of peace, had become targets. Both sides want our records, her father said. The contracts, the bloodline maps, the rights of succession. His voice cracked. They'll kill us for them, Elizabeth. Or worse, force us to choose who lives and who dies. Her mother pulled her close. We're going to disappear for a while. Change our name. Live quietly. But what about our house? Our books? Books can be replaced, her mother whispered. You cannot. They'd left in the dead of night. No goodbyes. No trace. Her father found work as a translator. Her mother became a seamstress. They moved from town to town, never staying long enough to be noticed. Elizabeth learned to hide her intelligence, to dull her curiosity, to never mention the crescent moon or the name Lavelle. And then, when she was 14, they were gone. A carriage accident, they'd said. Quick. Painless. Elizabeth knew better. Accidents didn't happen to people who spent their lives running from wars. Thomas had found her a week later, a girl with no family, no name, no future. He'd brought her to the Arthur estate, given her work, kept her secret. She'd been hiding ever since. But now, staring at the journal, at her mother's handwriting, Elizabeth realized something. Her parents had hidden to keep her alive. She'd kept hiding out of fear. And fear, she was beginning to understand, was just another kind of death. The dress had been waiting for 26 years. Thomas led Elizabeth deeper into the archives the following evening, past rows of forgotten records, to an iron trunk she'd never noticed before. It sat beneath a canvas tarp, hidden behind a broken shelf. Your mother entrusted me with more than just a journal, he said, producing another key. The lock clicked. The lid creaked open. Elizabeth's breath caught. Emerald silk gleamed in the candlelight, folded with careful precision. Beside it lay a golden mantle, its fabric shimmering like captured sunlight. And beneath both, wrapped in linen, a pendant, a crescent moon carved from jade, suspended on a delicate chain. She wore this the last time the houses gathered in peace, Thomas said softly. Before the wars, before the fear. Elizabeth reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the silk. It felt impossibly soft, untouched by time. I can't. You can. Thomas's voice held no room for doubt. And you will. She lifted the dress from the trunk. It unfolded like water, the emerald fabric catching the light in waves. The cut was elegant, sleeveless, with a neckline that spoke of confidence rather than modesty. This wasn't a gown meant to blend in. It was meant to be remembered. The colors aren't an accident, Thomas continued. Emerald and gold, the markers of House Lavelle. Every vampire over a century old will recognize them the moment you walk in. That's what I'm afraid of. Good. He met her eyes. Fear means you understand the weight of what you're carrying. But don't let it stop you from carrying it. Over the next 3 days, Thomas helped her prepare. He taught her how to walk again, not the hurried shuffle of a servant, but the measured grace her mother once possessed. Head high, shoulders back, each step deliberate. You're not apologizing for taking up space, he reminded her when she faltered. You're claiming it. He showed her how to hold her hands, not clasped nervously, but relaxed at her sides, fingers loose. A scholar's hands. Hands that once turned pages of power, not scrubbed floors. He even corrected her speech. You've spent 40 years making yourself small in language, he said. No more I'm sorry. No more if it pleases you. You are a Lavelle. You don't ask for permission to exist. The night before the wedding, Elizabeth stood in front of the cracked mirror in Thomas's archive room, wearing the emerald gown. The golden mantle draped across her shoulders, like a crown of light. The jade pendant rested against her collarbone. She barely recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't a maid, wasn't invisible. The dress fit as though it had been made for her, because it had. Her mother had worn the same build, the same quiet strength in her frame. Thomas stood behind her, his reflection solemn. Your mother told me something before she left you here, he said. She said, if the world ever forces her to choose between hiding and becoming, make sure she knows. We didn't raise her to disappear. Elizabeth's eyes burned. I don't know if I can do this. You already are. Thomas placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Tomorrow, you're not going to that wedding as a servant. You're going as the daughter of the house that crowned kings. Let them see what they've been stepping over all these years. She took a breath. Then another. The woman in the mirror stood taller. What if they reject me? Thomas smiled, sad and knowing. Then they'll have to do it while looking you in the eye. And that, my dear, is more than they've ever given you before. Elizabeth nodded slowly. Tomorrow, she would walk into that ballroom. Not to be mocked, but to be seen. The ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles. Elizabeth stood at the entrance, hidden behind the marble columns, watching the vampire elite gather like beautiful predators in tailored darkness. Black suits, midnight gowns, silver and diamond glinting at throats and wrists. Everything sleek, modern, sharp-edged. She looked down at her emerald silk, the golden mantle catching firelight. She would stand out like blood on snow. A servant passed, carrying champagne flutes on a silver tray. He glanced at Elizabeth, then did a double take, his eyes widening. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it and hurried away. It was time. Elizabeth stepped into the light. The first few guests didn't notice. They were too absorbed in conversation, in laughter that sounded like crystal breaking. But as she moved deeper into the hall, heads began to turn. One. Then another. Then a cluster near the fountain. The emerald silk whispered against marble as she walked, each step measured, deliberate, exactly as Thomas had taught her. Her chin stayed level. Her hands relaxed at her sides. A woman in black lace stared, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. An older vampire, his face lined with centuries, went pale. He gripped his companion's arm, whispering something urgent. Elizabeth kept walking. The crowd began to part. Not out of respect. Not yet. Out of confusion. Out of the primal instinct that something had shifted in the room's hierarchy, and they hadn't been informed. She heard the whispers start like wind through dead leaves. Is that impossible? Those colors. The maid. A young vampire in an expensive suit laughed, nudging his friend. Look, the help's wearing a costume. How charming. But his friend didn't laugh. His friend stared at the golden mantle with something that looked like recognition. Like fear. Elizabeth reached the center of the ballroom, where the marble floor opened into an intricate mosaic, a celestial map, stars and moons rendered in gold leaf. She'd scrubbed this floor 100 times. Knew every constellation by heart. She stopped there, standing in the middle of the universe her ancestors had designed. The music faltered. The quartet in the corner exchanged uncertain glances before trailing into silence. Now, everyone was looking. Stella appeared at the top of the grand staircase, radiant in white lace and fury. Her eyes locked onto Elizabeth, and for a moment, just a flash, something like panic crossed her perfect face. Then she recovered, descending the stairs with practiced grace. "My dear Elizabeth," Stella's voice rang out, sweet as poison. "How bold of you to interpret my invitation so creatively." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous, uncertain. Elizabeth met Stella's gaze and didn't look away. "I wore what my mother left me," she said quietly. But in the sudden silence, her voice carried. "I thought it appropriate for a royal occasion." An elderly vampire near the pillar inhaled sharply. He stepped forward, squinting at Elizabeth's pendant, at the crescent moon catching candlelight. "Lavelle," he breathed. The name dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ripples spread. More whispers. Heads turning to the older guests, the ones who remembered. Who had been alive when the Lavelles still held court. When scholars wore emerald and gold, and even kings asked permission before entering their libraries. Stella's smile tightened. "I'm sorry, what?" But the elderly vampire ignored her. He moved closer to Elizabeth, his ancient eyes searching her face. "You have Celine's eyes," he said softly. "I knew your mother." Elizabeth's heart hammered, but she held steady. "She spoke highly of the old ways," she replied, "before the fractures." His expression shifted, something between grief and reverence. Then, slowly and possibly, he bowed. A true bow, the kind given to equals. The ballroom held its breath. And Elizabeth, 40 years invisible, 40 years silent, finally let herself be seen. The elderly vampire's bow shattered something invisible. For 3 full heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. The gesture hung in the air like a declaration of war or surrender. Then a second figure stepped forward from the shadows near the grand staircase. King Frederick Arthur. He'd been watching from the moment Elizabeth entered, half hidden behind a column, observing what he'd assumed would be Stella's cruel theater. He'd expected embarrassment, perhaps tears, the quiet exit of a humiliated servant who'd forgotten her place. He had not expected this. The king moved through the frozen crowd with the fluid grace of something ancient and apex. His platinum hair caught the candlelight. His dark velvet tuxedo made him look like a blade wrapped in night. But his eyes, pale, sharp, unblinking, were locked entirely on Elizabeth. She felt his approach before she saw him. A change in air pressure. A coldness that wasn't temperature, but presence. The elderly vampire who'd bowed straightened and stepped aside, his expression unreadable. Frederick stopped 5 paces from Elizabeth. Up close, he could see details he'd never noticed in 40 years. The fine bone structure of her face. The way she held herself, not with the tension of someone pretending, but the ease of someone who'd merely been waiting. And the pendant at her throat, a crescent moon in silver, worn smooth by generations of hands.
His mouth went dry.
Lord Bastian, Frederick said quietly, not taking his eyes off Elizabeth. You bowed. The elderly vampire, Bastian, inclined his head. I did, Your Majesty. To a maid. To a Lavelle, Bastian corrected, his voice carrying through the silent hall. The last of the scholar bloodline. Daughter of Celine. Granddaughter of Lucien the Wise. The names fell like stones into deep water. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A younger vampire actually stumbled backward. Near the staircase, Stella's face had gone white as her dress. Frederick's jaw tightened. He'd studied the histories. Every king did. The Lavelles had been the first, the bloodline that mapped the stars, that wrote the laws, that legitimized crowns. His own great-grandfather had knelt before a Lavelle scholar to receive his throne. But they were gone, wiped out in the faction wars. The libraries burned. The lineage ended. That was what every record said. And yet, you've worked in my house for 40 years, Frederick said slowly. Each word measured. Dangerous. Yes, Elizabeth replied. Her voice was steady. You scrubbed my floors. Yes. Laundered my clothes. Served my table. Slept in the servants' quarters. Yes. His eyes narrowed.
Why?
The question cracked through the ballroom like a whip. Elizabeth met his gaze without flinching. Because my parents chose survival over pride. They hid our name, so I could live. And I honored that choice. Until tonight. Until tonight, she agreed. Stella's voice cut in, shrill and brittle. This is absurd. She's lying. She's a servant. Frederick, I invited her as a joke.
Be
silent. The king didn't raise his voice. Didn't even look at his bride. But Stella's mouth snapped shut as if he'd placed a hand over it. Frederick took another step closer to Elizabeth. Close enough now that she could see the silver flecks in his pale eyes. Close enough that the entire court could see him studying her like a puzzle he'd failed to solve for decades. If you are who Bastian claims, he said softly, dangerously, then you carry proof. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Because she did. And showing it would change everything. Stella moved before Frederick could stop her. She swept down from the staircase, her white lace train hissing against marble like a serpent's warning. In her hand, a crystal glass filled with wine the color of arterial blood. A toast, Stella announced, her voice bright and venomous. She thrust the glass toward Elizabeth with enough force that wine sloshed against the rim. Since you've dressed for the occasion, you might as well participate properly. The crowd shifted, uncertain whether to laugh or retreat. Elizabeth looked at the offered glass, then at Stella's face, beautiful and twisted with the particular cruelty of someone watching their power slip away. Take it, Stella insisted, her smile sharp enough to cut. Raise your glass to your betters. To the king. To his bride. To everyone in this room who was born to stand here. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that still carried. Unlike you. Elizabeth's fingers closed around the crystal stem. The glass felt cold, delicate, expensive enough to feed a servant's family for a month. She raised it slowly. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if she were performing a ritual rather than obeying a command. Her arm lifted in a graceful arc, the emerald silk falling away from her shoulder, the sleeveless cut of the gown leaving her forearm completely bare. Candlelight caught her skin, and Frederick saw it. His breath stopped. There, on the inside of Elizabeth's forearm, rendered in ink that had faded to the blue-black of ancient things, a tattoo. Not decorative, not modern.
A mark.
3 interlocking circles surrounding a crescent moon, with script spiraling outward in a language most vampires had forgotten how to read. But Frederick hadn't forgotten. He'd seen that mark exactly once before, pressed into red wax on a document locked in the royal vault. The seal that had legitimized his family's claim to the throne 6 generations ago. The mark of the Lavelle scholars, granted only to direct bloodline heirs who completed the rite of illumination. It couldn't be forged, couldn't be copied. The ink was mixed with moon silver and blessed blood, and it would burn away the flesh of anyone not born to carry it. Elizabeth held the glass high, her marked arms steady as stone. To truth, she said quietly, and to the houses that remember what crowns are built upon. She drank. The wine touched her lips, and she didn't flinch, didn't waver. Just lowered the glass with the same unhurried grace and returned it to Stella's trembling hand. Frederick stepped forward, his hand shooting out to catch Elizabeth's wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. He turned her arm toward the light, his thumb brushing just below the tattoo. His eyes traced every line, every curve of the ancient script. Let light shine in darkness. Lavelle eternal. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. You're not just descended from the scholars. Elizabeth met his gaze. No, she confirmed. You were initiated. You completed the rites. Before my 10th birthday. His grip tightened. Then you're not a lost heir. Her chin lifted slightly. I'm the keeper, Elizabeth said. The last living guardian of the libraries. The last voice of the first house. The ballroom erupted. Stella's laugh shattered the silence. It was high and sharp, edged with desperation trying to masquerade as amusement. Forgive her. Stella descended the remaining stairs, her white gown trailing like spilled milk. Frederick, darling, you're being dramatic. She's a servant. A clever one, I'll admit, wearing stolen heirlooms and spinning fairy tales, but a servant nonetheless. Frederick didn't turn to look at his bride. His eyes remained fixed on Elizabeth. Those aren't stolen, he said quietly. They're inherited. Stella's smile faltered. Count Moreau stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying weight. I was there when Celine Lavelle wore that very dress, Your Majesty, at the signing of the Twilight Accords. She stood where her daughter stands now, and we were better for it. Another elder spoke up, a woman with silver hair and eyes like cut glass. The Lavelles kept our records, settled our disputes. Without them, we would have drowned in our own blood. They disappeared during the faction wars, someone else added. We assumed the line had ended. Stella's face had gone pale, her knuckles white around her bouquet. This is absurd. Frederick, we're about to be married. You can't possibly. You invited her here to humiliate her. Frederick interrupted, finally turning to face Stella. His voice was cold, controlled. You used her as a prop to elevate yourself. I invited her out of kindness. You invited her out of cruelty. Each word landed like a gavel. And in doing so, you've revealed more about yourself than I'd seen in 5 years of courtship. Stella's mouth opened and closed. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Frederick looked back at Elizabeth. House Lavelle has no living heirs besides you. Your family's seat on the council has remained empty for 26 years. By right of blood and legacy, it belongs to you. Elizabeth's heart hammered. This was it. The moment she could reclaim everything her parents had given up.
Power.
Position. Recognition. a place at the table where kings asked her opinion. She met Frederick's gaze, earnest, remorseful, offering her a crown she'd never asked for.
And she realized something. She didn't want it.
Your Majesty, Elizabeth said softly, and the ballroom leaned in to hear. I'm honored.
Truly.
But my parents didn't leave the council because they were forced out. They left because they chose something more valuable than power. Frederick frowned. What could be more valuable?
Peace.
Elizabeth touched the jade pendant at her throat. They chose a quiet life over an influential death. They chose me over legacy.
Her voice steadied.
And I choose to honor that choice. You're refusing the council's seat? I'm refusing to let my worth be defined by a seat at all. Elizabeth looked around the ballroom, at the vampires and their finery, at the golden excess, at the careful hierarchies that had seemed so immovable an hour ago. I came here tonight because I was commanded to, because I was afraid of losing the only security I'd ever known. Her eyes found Stella's and held them. But I don't need your security anymore. I don't need your permission. And I certainly don't need your pity. Stella looked like she'd been slapped. Elizabeth turned to Frederick. My family's knowledge is still recorded in your archives. Thomas can help you access it, but I won't be staying to translate it for you. Where will you go? Frederick asked, and he sounded genuinely curious. Elizabeth smiled, small, real, and entirely her own. Somewhere my mother's work is continued. There are libraries beyond this estate. Scholars who still believe knowledge should serve peace, not power. She straightened the golden mantle across her shoulders. I'll find them. She curtsied then. Not the desperate, habitual curtsy of a servant, but the graceful acknowledgement of one equal addressing another. Then Elizabeth turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. The crowd parted like water. No one stopped her. No one dared. Stella stood frozen at the altar, her perfect wedding shattered around her like broken glass. Frederick watched Elizabeth go, something like regret flickering across his ancient face. And Thomas, waiting near the exit with a small traveling bag and a knowing smile, fell into step beside her. Well done, he murmured. Elizabeth stepped through the doors, out of the Arthur estate, into the cool night air. For the first time in 26 years, she had nowhere she was required to be. No floors to scrub. No silence to maintain. No smallness to perform. Just the open road, her mother's dress, and a future she would write herself. She had come as a punchline. She left as a legend. If Elizabeth found the courage to reclaim her voice after 26 years of silence, can you find 1 second to hit that subscribe button? Your support means everything to this channel. Like, share, and join us, because every story of transformation deserves to be seen. Thanks for watching.